Greetings, beloved family. Welcome to the inaugural episode of Voices of Liberation, a series dedicated to honoring the change makers, freedom fighters, and visionaries who are championing justice, reparations, and self determination for Afro-descendants across the globe. Today, we're launching this journey with a powerful conversation featuring Siphiwe Baleka, a leading voice advocating for a plebiscite on self determination right here in the United States and globally. He'll illuminate what it means for Afro descendants to reclaim their freedom, the pivotal role of the African Union will play in 2025, and why this moment is a transformative opportunity for all of us. If you are passionate about justice, believe in strength of our communities, or have ever pondered what's next for our people in reparations, this is the essential dialogue you don't want to miss. So join us, hit that like button, subscribe, and prepare to be part of a movement that transcends borders. This is Voices of Liberation. Let's dive in.
Emancipation Proclamation. Now you remember, before the Civil War, we were classified as subhuman. And they quantified how subhuman we were when they said we were only 3/5 of a human being. They quantified it. And therefore they said that in terms of representation in the United States Congress, we count all of the white free people as fully human beings. And then we count, right, this class of chattel slaves as 2/3. And based on that, that's how much representation you get in Congress. After the Emancipation Proclamation, and we were no longer defined as chattel slaves, 2/3, we now became fully, 3/5, 3/5 human being. We became fully 5/5 human being. Before we were 3/5 human being, now we are 5/5 human being, fully. Now, the Union, the Northerners, who had quote unquote won the Civil War and had power, realized, right, and the Southerners realized this too, that now all of these newly emancipated that are now 5/5 would cause the population of the Southern Confederacy overnight to grow by 2/5, which means their vote count, their representation in Congress would increase accordingly. And that would give the defeated Southern Confederate enough numbers to take control of Congress. So they lost the war, but they would win the government.
Wow.
Okay? So the Union, the Northerners, they're like, if we give them citizenship now, okay, we give them citizenship, they're likely going to vote for us, the Northerners, who they perceived freed them. They're not going to want to stay with the Southerners who have mistreated it and dehumanized them. So a political calculation was made. We're going to offer them citizenship through the 14th Amendment, right, in the hopes that the Southerners, they wanted it because they wanted their numbers to increase, but the Northerners were felt like, okay, we got to win them to our side. They're going to vote for us. So there's citizenship and the right to vote. So these are the political calculations that they had to think. Who's going to maintain control and how via the Constitution, based on the fact that we went from being 3/5 to 5/5 human beings. So just a historical note. They never taught us this in school.
Right. No, that's profound. And sounds like
It seemed like there was just these white people felt so benevolent and they felt so guilty and they wanted to do the moral right thing. So you can now be equal. That's not what happened at all. Mm-hmm. There's nothing but self-interest from these white people, once again, making decisions for us about how our future is going to be in terms of how it serves their interests. Right. Self-determination breaks us out of that experience. We no longer function because of decisions you made for your own self-interest. We now make decisions in our own interest.
Exactly. That the topic of self-determination, and I know we have time limits and things like that. This can be a 3-hour conversation, I can see, but I do want to have another aside because there is we're both in Africa. I'm in Kenya, and I'm sure, in June I would have been here for 4 years, so we've been in Africa, at least resident in Africa, for 3 years. 3 to 4 years. My observation, and I want to run this by you, as you get a lot of the cliches that end tribalism, which is the root of all problems in Africa, and embrace this nationalist mindset. Now, in the spirit of self-determination and observing tribes, right? So Kenya is larger than Guinea-Bissau, right? But they're about, to me, and I've been all over the country, I see, like, you could go from one region to the other, and they're like different countries. So I'm in coastal Kenya, different. Feels like a different country from central Kenya. Only thing is that they have this common flag, government offices, army, police. The uniforms are the same, but culturally totally different. And in that observation, and in the spirit of self determination, I said, well, the reason why Africa in certain African nations struggle, and you get a lot of the nightmares and the horror stories, the downside, the negative media and stuff like that, is that these countries were forced together by borders, and when the colonizers left these countries, they still were at an advantage, just because this is still managed as a nation that the colonizer created. If they really wanted to be free and independent, each tribe should have said, when you started this country, when you came here, there was no such thing as Kenya. Right? I am the leader of the Kikuyus, which is the largest ethnic group in Kenya. I know nothing about this Kenya thing, because even up until maybe millennials, like, you still have people that only speak their tribal language and not Swahili. You have these people that were still very much into their regions. And the struggle is now millennials are becoming more cosmopolitan, moving into these cities. They're trying to figure out, what does Kenya mean? What is this country? So in a lot of cases, the spirit of nationalism is not genuine, but they're really trying. And there are these slogans, we got to end tribalism. But at the same time, 60 years ago, when Kenya was given independence, each tribal person should have said, because when they were found, they were not found as Kenya, but you left this entity called Kenya. So administratively, we have to be Kenya, which is the favor of the colonizers, right? Each tribe should have had at least a self-determination vote. Do we want to be Kenya in the first place? We were fine in the central region of Kenya, from Mount Kenya down to Kilimanjaro. We were cool as Kikuyus, right? So now you're in a situation where I'm picking out Kikuyus because it's the largest ethnic group. You have Western Kenya, which is Luo. They're even Nilots, right? The central Kenya, they're more Bantu. Then you have the Swahili coast, and then you have Turkana region in the northwest, and then you have the Somali region in the northeast. 5 different countries. I mean, even you can drill it down within a region. You have different cultures from one end to the other. I just wanted to run that by you. I know I said a lot, but
watch this. That's what you just described is Africa's political version of ethnocide. Okay? Before they were colonized and before the Berlin Conference, they didn't have these countries with these borders. We talk about one map Africa, a borderless Africa, right? So before the colonizers, this label, Kenya, take any country, South Africa, okay? Any of the countries, they didn't have these borders, they didn't have these identities. The colonizers came in, Berlin Conference, they set it up, they gave their names, they gave these borders, they gave a framework. Then African liberation forces, self-determination forces, struggled for their liberation and for their freedom and their sovereignty. And the colonizers were forced to leave. When they left, though, they still left in place the framework. Now, by the same token, our ancestors were brought here. They were not brought here. They didn't know themselves as Black, Negro, African American. Those are the colonial borders in the United States context. When they make you fill out a federal form and you've got to click a box that says Black, African American, it used to say Negro, you're still, in the same way that Africa is using the colonial borders of Kenya, you on an individual level are still using the enslavement paradigm. You were never Black, you were never Negro, you were never African American. Okay? But you accept and you use those borders because they border you from white people. They border you from who you really are. That means that the harm, the crime of destroying Kunta Kinte's identity is continuing and living in you today. Because they took away these identities or labels or intellectual cultural properties, and they replaced them with black codes, slave codes, and you became licensed property identified by your category: Negro, Black, African American. So when you fill out a box, you check African American, that's the United States government failing to correct the harm, which they can do overnight, through mandating free African ancestry DNA testing for all people who are Afro-descendants, which you defined in the beginning of the show. Overnight, within 1 year, everybody could have that part of the damage repaired if those tests were offered free as part of reparations. And then you would no longer be using the colonial borders. We never look at it that way. We have lots of people think they're politically conscious talking about, oh, we need to decolonize Africa. And they haven't decolonized themselves first. They still have a American colonial identity and an American colonial framework and an American colonial product name: John Smith, okay, Carlos Watson, Johnson, Charles. Those are the American version of the colonial borders in Africa.
Yes, and not to disparage, I'm in Kenya. I love Africa. I still would be here. With this, where we have a lot in common, and sometimes in having these conversations where the audience is mixed, we look for our differences. But for me, being here, I can personally see we're the same. Right, so
this is where Pan-Africanism comes into it, right? So at one part of our history, we struggled for nationalism in a conventional sense. What we now need, because we now understand the nature of our existence now, is a Pan-African nationalism, where we understand, yes, I am Tutsi, I'm Hutu, I'm Akan, I'm Uwe, I'm Bamileke. We understand all of our quote-unquote ancestral identities. But we are going through a process of an ethnogenesis because of this period in history, where we now understand, right, that we are different families that have an inextricable, indissoluble birthright to what? The land and its resources that was given to us by God. We were born here in this land, and so all the resources in this land belong to all of us, because that river, those gold mines, they don't stop at the colonial border. Once we understand that, and we go from a conventional nationalism to a Pan-African nationalism, it brings us to, for example, a United African States, where the sovereignty of the people's self-determination, they say, you know what? No longer are we going to practice domestic violence amongst ourselves. Yes. We're going to, what? Set up a system that manages the human resources and the natural resources that is our birthright for the better development of our people, free from any foreign or alien domination. And that includes all African people, as Marcus Garvey repeated after Martin Delany first said it: Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad, and Africans to rule them. So if you live in Barbados, you live in Chicago, you live in Cleveland, right? You are now part of Africa's sixth region, right? Africa extends to the entire globe wherever we are. We are all part of one jurisdiction. And that's what this African diaspora sixth region. And let me conclude with this. I'm so glad you brought up the definition of Afro-descendants, because it can get confusing. We have the term African diaspora. Don't confuse the term African diaspora with Afro-descendants. The African diaspora consists of all Black people, all people of African origin, right? Regardless of how you left the continent. So if you chose to leave Africa because you wanted to go to school in America, you're part of the African diaspora. But your ancestors never suffered the trafficking and the enslavement. Okay, but you're part of the African diaspora. Right. The term Afro-descendant is not the same as African diaspora. Afro-descendants are one group within the African diaspora. Okay? Afro-descendants are a particular group within the African diaspora. So continentals in the AU, they call us the historic diaspora, right? So we don't want to confuse the terms. And then you have the term people of African descent, which is different from African diaspora and Afro-descendant. Mm-hmm. So it's good to have clarity about that. The Afro-descendants, we are becoming part of the jurisdiction of the African governing structure. So hopefully I made it clear and I didn't make it more confusing.
No, it's okay. Where people, if hopefully we can continue. How are we looking on time with you? Because I know we started a little late. How many more minutes do you have? So I know where I should skip to.
Five more minutes, and then we get ready for part number 2, I guess.
No problem. So no, I'll just skip ahead and we can, reconvene because we want to get to some call to actions because, we talked about this history and, theory and stuff like that. But there's actual real work, right? So a lot of people are like, I'm tired of all this talking, right? So the reason why I wanted to have this with you is that you're doing a lot of work. You and many other brilliant people globally are doing this kind of work. So I wanted to get to real quickly a few things. If there's one thing you want the TransAtlantic audience to walk away with from this conversation, what is it?
Wow, one thing to walk away from this conversation. If we don't form a united African states that has positive sovereignty, we run the risk of being completely recolonized in a new form in our lifetime. So let me give an example. Right now, the African Union is an intergovernmental association that has no sovereignty, it has no power. It is not a continental government, it is an intergovernmental association where 54 or 55, if you count all the people, even the ones that have been currently suspended, right? Where 55 individual governments in Africa come together to discuss policies and things like that. And then they make decisions or proclamations that they then take back to their country and decide whether or not they want to implement them or not. Now, as a result, the African Union could say overnight, we're going to stop selling lithium and cobalt to foreigners. We're just going to put a ban on it. we are going to leverage our resources and our power to be a force in geopolitics. They could make that decision overnight, but each individual country doesn't have to respect it. And so what happens is, even though decisions may be made at the African Union that may be of benefit to all African people, these